Let's.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Tifin Dillon. Looking forward to our conversation today.
I am too, Simon. Good to see you.
Yeah. Do any people just call you Tiff?
Yeah, that's my most common nickname.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
have you heard of like a cake dessert called Tifin cake? Have you heard of that?
Yes, and like the afternoon tea time called Tifin. I learned that when I was in college, actually. There
Yeah.
was a tea shop in Santa Cruz at that time called Gokula's Tifin. And
Yeah.
that's when I also learned about the Indian stacking metal
Oh, right.
containers are called Tifin.
Oh, they
My
are.
parents didn't
Yeah.
know that though. Yeah.
No, no. So, healing. What does healing mean to you, Tiff?
I have been thinking about this since we spoke before, and knowing this was going to be part of the conversation. I think of healing as that being restored to wholeness or being restored to full functional health. But I really have been more drawn to the like being restored to wholeness idea, and I think it's interesting in the realm of adoption wounding, right? Like I think we can do a lot of healing, but I don't know that there's ever a full wholeness. Or I'm in that question, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's down to that how you define identity as well, then, really.
Really down to that. Yes. Yeah, that good, because
It's a big question.
My biggest area of curiosity. And I know that all my life wondering, who am I? How do I know? And growing up in the sort of, the conditioning and expectations of my adoptive parents. And, they really believed, as so many adoptive parents did, that, a baby was a clean slate and they could teach them and mold them and, they would become, their child. And that was who I would be, and the question of nature and nurture in terms of identity really comes in there for me. And so I think for me, the whole healing journey has been around that question of identity. Who am I, and who was I before I was adopted? And who am I what parts of me have I inherited from biological family?
Yeah. I'm asking you questions and you're just firing more questions back at me.
I know, isn't that great? I am very much a questioner and curiosity, but I think it is important of like, what are the questions that we grapple with? And I think on the healing journey, any kind of a healing journey, I think the questions we're asking influence our healing. If we come at it from a really sick or broken or victim kind of perspective, like why me, or what's the matter with me, that kind of question leads to other questions and different answers than what's here for me, or what can I make of this, or how could this actually be something that I could create from, with, work with, rather than just be at the effect of.
Yeah. Well, where do I take it from there?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the questions of identity are really important for everyone, really. And I think in some ways, I wonder, I don't know, but I wonder if all of us in our growing and maturing journeys, whether we're adopted or not, I wonder if that question of who am I is central for people. And who am I becoming is the next question to me that feels more interesting.
Yeah. first thing for me is like the well, who am I really? That's Damon's podcast, isn't it? Damon
Mm-hmm.
Davis,
Yes.
Doctor, he's been on the show.
Yes.
On his, yeah. So there's kind of like there's who am I, right? And then there's who am I? Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah, right.
yeah. Who am
And
I?
that
It's
piece
that pain.
around that piece. So the who am I really, that points me in a like, oh, I've been pretending to be someone, or I've been wearing a mask, or I've been performing a role. But really, who am I? It's like, who am I behind that role of daughter to my parents? Who am I beyond oldest sister? Who am I beyond the roles I fulfill, or
Yeah.
and so that really, adding really in there takes it in a different direction, and a really important one. So I know for me, I I've been more aware of the different social roles or masks that I've worn in my life, and how easy it is for me to anticipate, even in a conversation like this. Oh, what's our conversation going to be about? How should I show up? And what will be useful and helpful? And how can we connect?
Yeah.
But the who am I really?
Who am I really sounds. It doesn't sound like an angry. I would say, who am I? I want to know. Who am I?
Oh, well,
You could
there's
say,
that
who
part of
I
it,
am.
isn't
Am
it?
I really? You wouldn't.
Right. There's that piece of it that, oh, I can feel that anger, that rage underneath that. And as I was a closed private adoption in the state of Arizona, where the records have been closed until just recently. I think in January of 22 or 3, they opened for it was a weird opening of the records. Like, if you were born between these dates, you now have access. And I fell within that range. But that angry, who am I? Like, why don't I get to know? Like, someone has the answer to this and they're not telling me. And that always infuriated me.
Yeah.
I didn't get to know. It was about me. Yeah.
So you asked whether identity is an issue for non-adoptees, and I would say, on the basis of the people that I've met in the learning spaces I've been in, definitely.
Yeah, and I would say that as well. I mean, I've been a teacher and a life coach for 25 years, and yes, I think it's a human question, and who am I growing into, and how can I, questions of how can I be my best self or live my best life. Uh, I do think it's a common human question, and I think there are nuances for adoptees.
Yeah.
Or those blockages of, we don't get to know where we came from or who we're related to, or I think being born into your biological family, I think people grow up like knowing things about themselves and their history that they just take for granted. They don't question that I'm thinking of, how people associate talents and skills and things like that is like, oh, you're good at this just like your dad, or you're good at this just like your aunt so and so, um, and adoptees are sort of like that grab bag mystery bag. you know
Yeah.
yeah.
So the restored to wholeness thing.
So yeah, so that, like, so I in my journey, I began searching when I was 19, and I went to Arizona and did what I could at the time, which was not much. And but I did find the lawyer who handled my adoption, and I went to his office and tried to get information from him. Uh, but I didn't get any answers. And it was, then another decade of really questioning and really wondering, and signing up for registries at that time, in the 80s and early 90s. And then really
Sorry about that, listeners. A technical glitch. We don't know whether it's American internet, British internet, or whatever it is. But here we are. So we're going to go. I just want to take you back, Tiff, to this idea that you mentioned earlier on about right at the start. Your definition of healing is, could it be like restored to wholeness? And you also said that that we are told, we are led, our parents were led to believe that we came as blank slates.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I put those two things together, are you saying that
Well,
are you
yeah.
saying that
So
restored to wholeness is kind of like rubbing? First off, are you saying that we're not a blank slate? There is something written on our slate, and what is written on our slate is trauma. And so restoring to wholeness is basically wiping the slate clean or wiping the trauma off.
I think that could be a part of it. So I think healing the trauma is part of our healing journey. But I think this idea of blank slate for me. So as a child, I wasn't thinking about birth mother, the adoption story I heard, and I knew very young that I was adopted, but it was framed in they really wanted children and they chose me and I was special and I made them so happy. That very
Yeah.
beautiful chosen child thing. And it suited me and it felt good. And my younger brother was also adopted. And then my sister was their biological child. And that's just sort of how our family was. I didn't really question it, you know, and until my late teens, when it was like, wait a minute, what about before that? And so I think the like coming into awareness of, oh, there's more to the story than I've been holding or than I've known. And now I want to know what that other part is. Like I think coming into late adolescence, early adulthood was when there was more of a dawning of, oh, there are pieces missing here and I don't know them and I want to know them, you know? And that's when I was more aware of there was a wounding, there was a missing of being separated from biological mother. Think I had wondered, like, well, who was she? And my mom and dad didn't know anything really. It was very closed adoption. Um, and then, but the story of like, she wanted you to have a better life, that like, okay, but I didn't know anything about her or her life. Um, and I will say, at that age, my parents had divorced when I was 16 and our family really fell apart. And so I had that family wounding as well. So I was more processing that, but then then I found, oh, and then also this other abandonment of family earlier.
Yeah.
So I think like in our awareness and, adoptees we talk about being in the fog and coming out of the fog. I think while I was in the fog place, I wasn't aware of the wound so much or the broken feeling or the need to know identity. I think accepted the family I had and the stories was told.
Yeah. I think we all fall for it, don't we, to a certain.
Oh, I think so. And I really have thought about this a lot. I think it's a very adaptive thing. I think it's a survival strategy. I think it's really, I'm grateful that I got to have a childhood where I was really so aware of that.
And our parents fell for it too, didn't
They
they?
completely fell for it. And it's been an interesting process in my parents are still alive and shared my search journey that so I did the DNA process and it took me 6 months to solve the puzzle 4 years ago. So during the COVID lockdown was when I did that. And they've both been supportive of, and like, yes, we'll help in any way that we can in your search since I started at 19 doing that. But they don't still have an awareness of the impact of adoption on people or how I hold it emotionally, even when I try to share, they just really don't see that. My dad shows some curiosity about it, and my mom acknowledges that I, am going through a process, but it's been harder for me to communicate the feelings of all the wide range of feelings that it brings up in me.
So a fellow adoptee I was talking to earlier on, we were talking about this idea of our parents admitting stuff. And I think one of the ideas was that they couldn't bear to admit to this stuff, and then I thought, well, no, that's not true. They just didn't know. They didn't believe that to be true. They weren't trying to. They weren't trying to pull the wool over our eyes.
I believe that too, and I think one of the other parts that adds to the wounding is the grief that's never spoken about that the adoptive parents have of not conceiving or not having their own biological child. That wasn't part of our story growing up. Not we tried for 7 years to have a baby and we finally decided to adopt. The grief in that or the struggle in that was never acknowledged. It was glossed over in like, we really wanted a baby for 7 years and then we finally found you, which I think is a much more happy ending sort of a story or a fairy tale sort of a story. But I think that there are layers of emotion that are glossed over. And again, I think that is also an adaptive strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
as a child, like looking at adoption, like I knew how much I was wanted and that they tried for so long and then they finally found me. It was that happy ending, intentional energy about me coming into the family. And then my younger sister is their biological child, but they didn't even realize that my mom was pregnant until she was 5 or 6 months along. And so my sister always had the attitude of she was the real child. And then I had the comeback of, well, they wanted me and you were a mistake. And we didn't have the healthiest sibling dynamics
no.
in my view. Yeah.
Wow.
What was the point of sharing that? I think that there's so many complexities and places along the way where, healing is about, healing from a wound or an illness kind of a thing. But the wounding part of it speaks to me and like, oh, there's the initial wound, but then it scabs over a bit and you function. And then something rips the scab a bit and then it bleeds again and it hurts again. And then it can heal up again and scab over. And, like we live with it and we work with it, but I think there's always a bruise or always a scab there. And hopefully, eventually it's a scar that just becomes part of us but does it ever fully go away? I don't think so.
I'm thinking about trying to frame the question in a.
I do have another idea to jump with. So back to the question of identity and who am I really? In the 4 years since I've known who my biological family was and about them, I feel like parts of me are filling in. Parts of like, oh, those empty pieces I can see. Oh, this is who Trudy was. This is who Phil was. This is what they were like. I have 4 half siblings. I've gotten to know 3 of them, filling in some other pictures of family. Both of my birth parents had died before I found them. And then my search became learning who they were and who else could I reach out to find out who they were, what they'd been like. But in that process, I think like more of the picture has been illuminated for me, or more of the pieces to the puzzle have come in so that sort of the image is fuller, and that self-image or that identity feels fuller to me now. not like the missing piece or the invisible inherited things. And in a way, like learning their personality or character things as their, people had described them, the recognition of, oh, those are characteristics, traits, personality things that I recognize. Like, I am kind of like each of them. And that has helped me feel more myself.
Yeah.
So more, I feel a stronger sense of identity. Now, is that part of being 59 years old and that's a natural part of maturing? Maybe. Is it part of this search and finding and learning piece? I think so, Yeah.
What did you learn from becoming a life coach in terms of either identity or feelings, or
Oh
both?
my gosh. Yes. Thanks for bringing that in because I was thinking about that too. So it was really important in my journey. I did the training when I was 35, and they started off with just sort of other classmates ask each other, what do you want? And I found at that, like, what are your dreams and what do you want? And I found that question absolutely paralyzing. I did not know what I wanted. I didn't know a direction of my life. I didn't really know what, wasn't necessarily that I didn't know what I liked or what my preferences were, but I felt like I didn't have the right to them. I felt like like, back to the masks that I wear, or like in the role of the eldest daughter, I was always expected to be concerned for others, to look after my siblings, to help around the house, to if I expressed what I liked or what I wanted to do, I was being selfish. And a question I heard often was, who do you think you are? Like to want that or to expect something. And so that question itself, who do you think you are, repeatedly poked my wound of who am I? Or that unknown question. And so the beginning of coach training helped me personally in like that self of, well, what do I want? What is important to me? What are my values? What are my preferences? Oh, you mean I get to create my life the way I want it to be, not just following my parents' expectations or societal expectations, or gee, I went to college, got my degree, I've been teaching, like I need to just do the jobs. And it really was it was confronting and opening for me personally. And then that there were, it was a process to engage people in self-discovery. And it was a process that I then got to really enter into my own self-discovery around. Actually, this is part of what I was thinking about sharing about the question of thriving. You talked about focusing your work more with healing and thriving. The coach training that I did really emphasized that thriving. How do we find fulfillment and purpose and that quality of thriving in our lives, and that we need to know ourselves. We need to know what's important to us, our values. We need to know our strengths and our gifts and what makes us feel alive, to feel that sense of thriving. But for me, it started with that kind of confronting question of what do I want? And that then like self-worth question for me of like, well, do I get to want what I want? Or what's the point of wanting what I want if it's just going to be shut down, or that I have to put it aside so that I can help other people get what they want? And yet it's a path, a career path, that's really what it is about, is helping other people know themselves and get what they want, design their lives and align more with who they actually are. That fascinates me. It's like I engage with these questions of who are you and what's thriving and who are you becoming have been the main questions in my work over the last 25 years.
So you mentioned being the eldest sibling, and you mentioned a little earlier on about your youngest sister throwing "you're not, I'm the real, I'm
Right.
the real kid."
Yeah.
Did that? I mean, did it hurt? To what extent did that hurt, or did you just kind of?
It did. It did. And um, my dad's mother, our grandmother, lived with us during part of our childhood, and she very had that prioritizing preference as well.
Ooh. But
Like I was great because I was the first, and then my brother was great because he was a boy, and then my sister was really great because she was the
yeah,
biological or real one, you know.
but it didn't. You didn't paint a picture of being racked by it earlier on.
I don't think I was wrecked because I think I had my comeback. I had my, well, I was wanted and you were just had, you know, you were a mistake. I had that like weapon. Uh, and, you know, I was older and taller and ahead. And so it didn't take me down. But it did have an effect. Yeah. Um, and, you know, I then around in childhood too, recognizing that in school and kids insulting each other, you know, by telling each other that you're adopted was a threat and an insult. And I think that people use that. There's a double edge to it though too, because I know a lot of people who weren't adopted often wonder if they were because they don't feel like they fit in their family. They don't feel like they belong. Um, so it can be that threat of like you don't belong here, you're adopted and you don't fit, or when you have a sense of not fitting, that well, I'm adopted and I belong somewhere else.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
I think so. I want to go back to the blank slate thing, because
Okay.
to me it's so I think the way I kind of formulated the question was, so we're not blank slates. We come with pre-verbal. We come with we
We
come
have
with language.
pre-verbal memory, right? Our bodies, and what I've been learning in the last several years of reading about trauma and epigenetics, and like we inherit the psychological and emotional trauma and patterns of our lineage. And our bodies, our cells hold that memory. So it's not a blank slate.
And it's just come to me as you express that nobody's a blank slate.
Nobody is, right? Nobody
Even
is.
even kept. Have you heard this word? Kept kids. Kept.
Kept.
Yeah. So we're adopted.
Uh-huh.
They're you could say, well, they're non-adoptees, right?
They're
But
kept.
they're
Right.
kept.
Okay.
They're kept.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But you know, so
Yeah.
that whole thing, and that
It's
takes
just that ours is unknown. Largely is unknown
indeed.
too, because, you know, most of us are unconscious of all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Um, but I think part of the process of healing for me and part of the process in the coaching work I do is helping people become aware of the messages that we get, aware of the conditioning, aware of our beliefs, and then realizing that we have agency. Like, oh, I was given that self-image. My parents wanted me to be this way, and they, you know, told me I was. And I can question that. Is that true? Does that feel true to me? Do I want to move with this forward? You know, how do I want to be? And that sort of process of maturing and individuating as we grow up, and then a process kind of becoming more aware uh, of our, you know, questioning beliefs. Like, is that really, really true? Or, you know, is it true for me still?
yeah.
Yeah. I
So
mean, Yeah. And in that way, I think that's where we get to play with the eraser and the erasable pen on our slates, like, oh, I'm noticing, oh, here, oh, something's appearing. Oh, there was an invisible ink, and now I get to question that. And I bring it to my awareness. And then it's like, if that feels good and it feels true, it can be part of our self-image and our identity. And if it doesn't fit anymore, then we can work at rewriting, at recreating.
So as a coach, you're surfacing, you're bringing the beliefs out of the darkness into the light, and
Yeah.
you're pointing towards them, and so that the client can hopefully see what is being pointed at,
Right. Right.
and make a conscious kind of decision around that.
Right. And kind of that refining sense of self and what's true, or just questioning. I know I've always been a big questioner, but uh, I school came easily to me. I was a good student, high achieving, went right to college, but really questioned, like, what do I want to be doing with this? You know, um, and I took time out to. That's the year that I began my adoption search. I took a year off from college, and I traveled, and I went to Arizona to search, and um, to question not just that automatic pilot of, you're good at school, of course you're going to college, you're going to get a degree, you're going to, just like whatever that path was, but to question, like, why am I here? What am I doing? What am I interested in learning?
Yeah, I'm fascinated with your blank slate thing. Perhaps because I'm not quite as bright. Um, I'm thinking that we could have the blank slate has got some generational trauma on it, and then the relinquishment trauma is kind of added to that. So we can maybe we can, whether we can or whether we can't. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? If we were
Right.
if we were able to erase the relinquishment trauma, just assuming we were, would we be also be able to erase the generational trauma? I mean, we're going to be on a trauma hunt for the rest of our lives, aren't we? It's going to be like whack-a-mole, right? I've got rid of that. So if I was to look at, I've got rid of the parents divorcing. Yeah. So you're divorced, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So if I was to, so we can get rid of Tiff's divorce trauma, because that's got to be a hellish time for everybody to go through, right? We can get rid of that, and then we can get rid of we can get rid of the parental divorce trauma, right? Then we can get rid of the relationship, then we can get rid of the relinquishment trauma, and we're just going to be on a game of whack-a-mole trauma for the rest of our lives, aren't we?
I think that's that's a perspective of it. And I think what rings true for me in that is that the way my processes worked, and the way the different, grief comes in waves. The awareness of the pain or the trauma for me comes in waves. And then I'll deal with this piece. I'm like, oh, as my parents are aging, and I'm realizing, like, oh, they're not going to be around, like the pre-grief waves. But then that brings up past family grief. My divorce brought up memories and things about my parents' divorce. New relationships and dating things not working out feels like not being chosen. Like, different experiences in our lives, I think, bring past memories and traumas and wounding to our awareness, right? So in that sense, I think there's cyclical things of like where, but the whack-a-mole thing, I don't think we whack them down and they're done. I think there's a healing, and there's a way that then we can integrate some of that into our self-image, and then we have more capacity. We come into ourselves more. We're still going to be, I think, feeling those waves of grief or awareness of the wounding or the trauma. But I think we have then more, we're stronger in ourselves. We have more ability and capacity to meet it, and to allow it to pass through, or to have another layer of healing happen, or to, we gain more facility and we get more tools as we go along.
So you're saying we
and
are
I think
integrating.
Integration, right? Healing and integration. And as we integrate a new aspect of healing, then that helps us meet either fresh new woundings, because we're alive, and of course that's going to happen too. We have disappointments in all areas of our lives, right? And some are more painful than others, that may then bring up, or echo some of our relinquishment trauma or our abandonment trauma or our, family of origin, adoption, family trauma, but I also, the various ways that we approach these questions of identity and who am I, have been, or the ways I've approached them, have helped my healing and strengthening that sense of self that gives me more ability to ride those waves of grief, or deal with the moles as they come up out of their holes, and I studied psychology in college, been fascinated with human development. I taught middle school for years, an age that is really in that identity question of who am I? But I also have been fascinated with different personality typing systems, and with astrology as a way of understanding who I am. And the astrology piece, I know I shared with you when we connected before, has been really deeply meaningful to me as a map of the sky when I was born. And the astrology says, this gives us an indication of your natural given, your essential qualities, character, your natural strengths, your natural within you struggles, and the dynamics that you're going to be working out in this lifetime. And I had my first reading that same year that I began my search. And that astrology reading at that time in my life really blew me away, that here was someone who could tell me about myself, who never met me and only had my time of birth, but it gave me something to hang on to, and to explore. That was just about me. Wasn't about who my parents wanted me to be, or what my teachers and my culture and, religion or any of the other viewpoints, but really just who am I? And over the years, I've studied and really become fascinated with that tool. And for the last 8 years, I've been using astrology with my clients, and just having astrology clients too. But for that self-discovery, for a deeper look at identity and our journey of life, and like what questions are we like, is our soul being asked in this lifetime? And I think that for me, it's helped illuminate, like, oh, it's not just that everyone out there, I keep repeating these same relational patterns. Like, oh, that's a pattern within me. That's a sensitivity or a way of approaching the world that I have. So of course I'm going to see things through that lens. Or even understanding that we have emotional lenses, and we have intellectual mind lenses that we perceive life through. And it feels embarrassing now, but to realize that not everyone thinks the way I think was revolutionary to me. And it's been really helpful in my growth, because it's like up until that point, I really thought, like, why are people not getting it? Like, but we don't think the same way,
No.
any of us.
So what's changed on your adoption lens?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I feel like I'm in a process of change with it right now. So I'm going to be going to the Untangling Our Roots conference in Denver in a couple of weeks. And it's bringing up like, oh, I'm going to be examining the adoption question in a whole new ways and meeting people who are in different parts of the constellation. And I feel like the last few years I've been in a process of integration with it, of like, absorbing and integrating what I found out about my birth family, kind of adjusting that self-image and healing some of it. In the lens too, I have been becoming more aware of how automatic it is for me to try to be understanding of other people, and how easily I sort of put myself aside and try to, if I can understand why they did what they did, like that would be adaptive for me or keep me safe or something. But um, there's a way of balancing that in myself. That's part of the lens that I'm like fine tuning. Like, you go to the optometrist, it's like lens A or lens B, and you have to choose which is clearer. And I kind of feel like, oh, being totally oriented over there with the other people, whether that's my adoptive parents, their perspective, or birth parents, like what went into their decision making at 23 when they discovered they were pregnant with me. And that overly understanding the other person's perspective, but then the other lens is like, how do I see it? What do I need? What do I feel? And like, I'm learning to pay attention to both of those lenses and find a way that that's then a binocular view of my life or adoption or, the question.
So what's your aim, or what are you looking for? Is it clarity? Is it, because you said you're 59
What am I
now,
looking for?
35.
Yeah, what am I looking for? Yeah. I think it is, a more mm, more consistent sense of wholeness, a more consistent sense of who I am, uh, self-compassion and acceptance, I think. Uh, and I think there's still a big
Not
part of me
self-awareness.
of what?
Sorry,
Self-awareness?
not self-awareness.
Yeah, self-awareness, but acceptance of, oh, this is like the whole of my life. Um, uh, I think there's a part of me that's still so yearning for belonging and feeling like I have a family.
I haven't used this word before, but it seems to be kind of an appropriate one, um, uh, to sum up what I think, how you've been over the last, whatever it's 45 minutes cycle. Have you heard the word equanimity? Have you heard that word?
Yes. Yes. I do think I'm seeking equanimity. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's how I would describe you.
Oh, you sense equanimity in me.
Yeah. I couldn't put it in, I couldn't define the word equanimity, but
Yeah.
somehow it's like, it's a gut level feeling.
Yeah. Mm.
So that the, like, you've
It's
not really.
bringing up a lot of emotion. That feeling. I
Oh,
think that is something I've been seeking and trying to cultivate. And so it feels really, that acknowledgement feels really important. Thank you. And that equanimity of like considering others in the big picture, but really considering myself in it. That's the balance that's sort of like both and, you know, to me, that's what it is feeling like. Yeah. Like I can hold the pain and the trauma and the not knowing and the confusion of identity and acknowledge all of the growth and learning and healing that I have done so far. And I think equanimity to me makes it's like there's enough. I'm enough. I've learned enough, healed enough. I'm wondering, like, when is enough?
Yeah.
You know?
I had
Yeah.
that.
When is
Yeah.
enough?
When
Yeah.
is enough? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now.
And that question of when does whack-a-mole stop?
Oh, yeah.
And I do have hope, Simon, that in a conversation recently with another adoptee, where she said that she feels complete in her journey. And that was the first time I'd really heard another adoptee say that. Not out of resignation of like, well, I got as far as I could in my search, or, oh, I found them, but they're dead already. But really, like, she sounds and feels and is claiming that she's complete. And that really gives me hope. And it also makes me realize, like, you know what? Even if I don't have all these answers or it's not 100% healed, I am still complete in myself. We are all whole human beings. And there is a sense of, can be a sense of completion in that, I think.
That's well finished.
And if we're not always working on healing or fixing, then I think it opens our lives up to enjoying and thriving. But I think they're not, first you have to do all the healing and fixing and then you get to thrive. I think it's weaving together, you know, like attention on what is fun, what does feel good, what does bring me joy, what relationships, what friends to spend time with, or brother and sister-in-laws to have dinner with, or, what are the things in life that bring me joy and make me feel like I'm growing and thriving.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tiff. Thanks, listeners.
You're welcome. This has been great. I really appreciate your questions and your perspectives and the opportunity to talk with you about this.
Thank you. Thanks, listeners. Bye-bye.